day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual tour of the Valley of Desolation and Boiling Lake in Dominica. My name is Richard Robertson. I'm a geologist at the UWI Seismic Research Center. We are the agency responsible for monitoring volcanoes in Dominica and the rest of the English-speaking Eastern Caribbean. Now, I'd like to thank, first of all, the persons who have helped to provide the photographs that I'm using today and the video that I'll be sharing with you today. I didn't take a lot of them. I've been unable to credit them all completely, but I've tried to put links in the end of the presentation to show you where they were sourced. Now, the virtual tour is part of Earth Science Week, which we are celebrating this week in Dominica and trying to help to raise awareness of volcanism and volcanic hazards in Dominica. Now, before we actually start the tour, I can't really tell you about start a virtual tour without telling you a little bit about volcanism. That's what it's all about. I want to speak to you briefly about volcanism on the island of Dominica. This is the process that is directly responsible for the landscape which we will be visiting today, you see. My first slide there shows you the volcanic landscape. There is a simplified geologic map in a sense showing you all the live volcanoes on the island. Now, by this I mean volcanoes which, because of a combination of several factors, specifically the young age of their rocks, the presence of hot springs and fumaroles, which are vents from which volcanic gases are emitted, and the occurrence of periodic earthquake swarms or elevated seismicity associated with them. Because of these, we consider that they can erupt in the future. Now, as you can see, there are lots of volcanoes on Dominica. In fact, Dominica has the largest concentration of live volcanoes anywhere in the Caribbean. Now, the area we'll be visiting is actually in the southern part. You see down to the south there, just outside Roseau, and it's part of the Mont Tropiton volcanic complex, which, in case you didn't know, and I suspect all you Dominicans know that, is a World Heritage Site. A fantastic place to visit, quite apart from the Valley of Desolation and Boiling Lake. Now, again, I can't continue without telling you a little bit about the Valley of Desolation and Boiling Lake itself, which are surface manifestations of what we call a geothermal system. Geothermal systems that is associated with volcanism that help to create the Mont Tropiton volcanic complex. Well, geothermal systems exist because of the presence of magma, the very thing that drives volcanoes. They are beneath the surface and they are slowly degassing. And geothermal systems are essentially a natural way of transferring heat from this heat source, magma, to the surface. The magma heats up the surrounding rock, which in turn heats the groundwater that is percolating into the earth due to rainfall. It comes from rainfall. That hot water rises, gets heated up, forms steam, rises to the surface, and it brings with it some of the very volcanic gases that is coming from the magma beneath. And in so doing, it creates fumaroles. The Valley of Desolation is simply an area littered with fumaroles, while the Boiling Lake is a flooded fumarole, buried fumarole. The fumaroles have been flooded with water, and the fumarole then heats the water that results in the boiling. Just a little bit of historical trivia. The first sort of recordings of the area and sightings of the area recorded. Of course, the presence of the Boiling Lake and the Valley of Desolation must have been known by the indigenous people long before that. But the first sort of Europeans that went poking around the area was two gentlemen called Edmund Watts and Henry Nicholls, both of whom were commissioned in 1875 to investigate the lake. Now, they were the first to take measurements of the lake size, including its depth and the temperature of the boiling lake water. So we owe them that for taking the first sort of quasi-scientific measurements of conditions of the lake and describing it. Okay, so it's time to start our tour. But before I do so, I must tell you that Dominica has some of the most fantastic hiking trails, of which our hike today is really just one of the many hiking trails you have. If you're really up to a long hike, you really need to try the Y2 Kubuli, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, National Trail, which is the longest hiking trail in the Caribbean. It's a national trail, and it goes for quite a distance. And I'm hoping that after the tour today, the virtual one, you will not only take our hike, the hike that I'm going on virtually for real, but that you'll try out some segments of this 114-mile Y2 trail that is Dominica's national trail and one of the longest in the region. Now, if you go to the Boiling Lake, this is the first thing probably you'll see at the top of the trail. A sign there that shows you, tells you something basically about the trail conditions and all that. Because there's no road leading to the Valley of Desolation. You have to walk. There's no way around it. But the trail starts at this village of Laudat, which is at the Tito Gorge. And it involves 14-mile hike there and back from the road. It's strongly recommended that you get a guide. You get one at Laudat or Roseau. You need somebody that knows the trail, because even though it's well defined, there are areas where you have to walk along ridges, other parts where you have to scramble along rocks, you have to walk over hot areas. So investing in someone who knows the area is to your benefit, and there are lots of good guides around. Now the path is extremely muddy, and despite the steps in some areas, you're gonna get wet, your clothes are gonna get wet, muddy. It could be quite loose to the footing. So don't wear your Sunday best and your best clothes. Come with something ragamuffin style, and especially wear some comfortable hiking shoes. You're gonna be walking for 14 miles, remember? Now, our virtual tour of the area, and I'll just jump to the next slide to show you sort of a map that shows you the segments, and the green segment is the first one we're going on. We're gonna divide it into segments, and each segment takes about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll go from the first part of the trail goes from the Tito Gorge to a place called Breakfast River. And then we go from Breakfast River, we make a brief stop at Mount Nicholls along the way to the Valley of Desolation, which is the next sort of major stop. And then we get to the Boiling Lake, and then we make the way back, right? So the first part starts at the village of Laudat, which is at the Tito Gorge, which is 1,690 meters above sea level. So you're starting high already. And it ends at the Breakfast River. Now this trail starts as a steady climb, a steady kind of slog, I'll call it. Along, you could see in the picture there on the left, some of the conditions. Along the way, you probably will you'll get one or two places you could look into the Tito Gorge, into the river. Again, you need a guide to point out to you where's a good place to do that. But the point is, the Tito Gorge is a good place to come back to at the end, to soak your weary limbs at the end of the walk. The walk is mostly on the pristine tropical rainforest. It's along a path that is clearly defined by slippery logs, some rocks in between. It's going to be generally cool, but it's going to be wet and it's going to be muddy. By the time you get to the Breakfast River, which is the next stop, you're probably going to be all muddied out. So, good hiking shoes, not so good clothes, something that's comfortable, but not your best, right? So you arrive at the Breakfast River where these folks are here. This is a party of scientists on the live who's going to do some monitoring in the Boiling Lake. And on the right, you have some pictures there of the start of the next part of the climb. Here at the Breakfast River is your last chance to get clean drinking water. You should eat breakfast. If you didn't have breakfast, you should have started the trail early in the morning, because it's a long trail. So you want to start early to get back there in time before it gets dark. So now, this is your Breakfast River. This is your place to have your breakfast, right? So this is where you have your breakfast, because after this, this part of the climb, this part of the walk, it's been all easy so far. You're then going to largely go uphill for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Just straight uphill. There's no way out of it. Uphill. And the next stop is going to be at the top of Mount Nicholls, which is over 3,000 feet above sea level. We went from 1, we're now going to go all the way up to 3, right? So you're going up 2,000 feet. And from Breakfast River to Mount Nicholls, we basically went on the way to the Valley of Desolation. That's the next major stop. Incidentally, Mount Nicholls is named after one of the same gentlemen I was telling you about that first made measurements of the lake. These 2 Europeans that I mentioned earlier. There's a small clearing there at the top of the lake, which is a good place to stop and rest. Now, along the way, you're going to have some views like this one of the surrounding landscape, which is really beautiful. Along the way, you probably might see Mount Nicholls, which we're going towards. The one on the left shows you an antenna, which I'll get back to later on, but that's the kind of viewpoint you'll get. Now, our next sort of break is Nicholls, which these hikers have, which is actually their monitoring scientists. We'll get back to them later on. But this was one of the places that we used to monitor the volcano from. We had a seismic station just down the bank. Unfortunately, vandalism of the site is very far, it's very remote, it's difficult to maintain, difficult to replace. It's no longer operational, but it's a good seismic site. It's a good place to monitor the volcano from, but it's difficult to maintain. On a clear day, it's a nice place to have you basically a point where you could get 360-degree view of the surrounding rainforest. It's really nice to see. You might be lucky if it's clear enough, you might see roads in the distance, and it's a nice place to take a little break after your long slog. After this stop though, the trail continues along a ridge for about 20 minutes, leaving you at the top of the trail into the Valley of Desolation. And as you descend into the valley, you might be able to see a vantage point. You might get a vantage point like the one here in the photograph, looking down into the valley and seeing in the distance the steam coming from the Boiling Lake, which we're going to head towards shortly. Now, as we descend into the valley, we're gonna follow some hikers, in fact, some monitoring scientists, and we're gonna go and follow them quickly as we go down the valley to give you a feel of how it is going into the valley. This video is a speeded up version of the hike into the Valley of Desolation. It shows a party of scientists led by Dr. Urasila Joseph, director of the UWI Seismic Research Center, as they make their way into the valley. The descent is perhaps the most difficult and dangerous part of the hike, as the area is often unstable and affected by landslides. You must be very careful in descending into the valley. Place your foot on stable ground and be prepared on occasions to get down on all fours. Vegetation thins out along the path and the unexposed underlying rock is exposed. These are mostly loose volcanic rocks that are brown in color and deeply weathered due to hydrothermal activity that occurs in the area. This is one of the places along the path where an experienced guide comes in quite useful in ensuring your safety. It can take up to half an hour to get fully into the valley, but of course we will take much less time in our speeded up video because we are just about to end. And we're now in the Valley of Desolation. We're gonna look at what we are seeing in the valley. The valley is really littered with steaming hot fumaroles or vents that emit hot volcanic gases, which are sometimes covered with a very thin crust. That's one of the things you have to be careful about. This thin crust covers the hot vent and is easy for it to look like the rest of the surrounding ground for you not to see it. And therefore you can easily walk into one of these vents and be badly burnt at the very least. So be careful where you place your foot when walking in the valley. This is a region that truly represents its name, with colored streams, hot sulfur smelling gas, surface rocks of many colors, and sulfur loving vegetation, because it's very, very high content sulfur, lots of sulfur all over the place. It is, as my next slide says, truly an alien landscape of sulfurous rocks with rotten egg smell associated and legs calling vents of steam that can open without warning. There's an abundance of gray and red clays, result of deep weathering due to the volcano hydrothermal conditions. The volcanic material, the fresh volcanic rock, you could hardly find because it's been deeply weathered in the hot, wet conditions that you have. There are lots of places, there are many places, particularly as you go lower down the valley, where you'll find pools like this, where you can bathe in the soothing, warm waters of the stream or cover yourself with this sulfur-rich mud, volcanic mud, which is lush in minerals and said to be good for your skin. The trail becomes very vague as you go further down the valley. It crisscrosses the stream in the area and many times. Along with the dangerous descent that we just came through, and the rest of the trip from here, from the Valley of Desolation itself to the Boiling Lake, is really, along these paths, is really where you see the value of your guide. You need someone who's familiar with the area. So investing in your guide is a good idea. Now, the next thing that we're gonna do, quite briefly, we're gonna take another one of those detours that we had into some video footage. We're gonna look at some rock and gas sampling in the Valley of Desolation, on the ways in which you monitor the volcano. So I'm going to stop briefly, let you enjoy the video, and then come back and take you along the way to the final part of our journey. Monitoring scientists at this SRC periodically collect rock and gas samples from the Valley of Desolation. Rock samples, as you see here, being taken, help us better understand the effects of the volcano hydrothermal system, particularly the acidic conditions and the breakdown of rock materials, while gas samples, which have been collected here by Dr. Joseph, help us to track the possible movement of magma. Now in the video, we see Dr. Joseph collecting volcanic gases in a special glass bottle using a plastic tube that is connected, a white tube that's connected, as you see there, towards the bubbling water there, and it actually is connected to a funnel which is covering a vent beneath the surface located in that area. We expect, when we do this, that the composition of these gases to change over time with the influx of fresh magma, and so potentially giving us a wonderful eruption. Right, so we're back, and we're going to continue on. And our next stop is the PES, the resistance. We are now at the boiling lake. This is where we've been struggling to get to for the longest while. And we are at this ledge here, this broad cliff top ledge that directly overlooks the boiling lake. At this point, you're about 100 feet above the lake surface. So be careful, stay away from the ledge, don't get too close for various reasons. It's loose, you could fall in, apart from the fact that sometimes conditions are bad in terms of the volcanic gases. The lake is usually engulfed in clouds of steam, so you don't really see very much. There's a lot of sound. It's a natural basin that collects rainfall from the surrounding hills, as well as two small streams that flows into the area. It's about 200 feet by 250 feet wide, and this makes it the second largest naturally hot lake in the world, the largest being the Frying Pan Lake in New Zealand. Now, studies undertaken by scientists over the past 50 years and observations made prior to that indicate that the lake is actually suspended well above the local water tables, the local water table below it. And the fact that the lake is present and suspended is due to the continuous influx of steam and gas as basically keeping this water suspended above the natural water table. And this gas and steam is generated by the underlying magmatic material that, earlier on we spoke about hydrothermal system, geothermal system. This is what drives the water into the lake. As such, any kind of disturbance of this steam, this rising steam, is gonna disturb the equilibrium, and it's gonna mean that the gas is no longer keeping the lake uplifted. And once that gas is not there, keeping it suspended above the water table, the water is gonna leak through the very vents from which this gas was coming up. And this, in fact, happened before. This draining, resulting in fluctuations in the water level, has in fact happened. In 1880, there was a phreatic explosion, and fairly bigger one than we have had recently, and the lake disappeared with only a fountain of hot water and steam remaining. Again, in 2004 to December 2004 to April 2005, which is what these pictures are from, sorry. There was another phreatic explosion, a bit smaller, and the lake level lowered again to 33 feet, about 10 meters. And then more recently, over a 6-month period, there was instability, and from November 2016, it drained. On each occasion when this happened, this instability happened, and the lake drained, eventually it resettled itself, and it reestablished itself. The steam got to the stage where it was able to sustain the water above it, and the lake again got reestablished, and again began to boil. Because the lake is essentially, in essence, a flooded fumarole. It's formed through a combination of factors, including the presence, as I mentioned before, of the active hydrothermal system, the fact that you have a lot of rainfall, and these steep slopes, deeply weathered volcanic material. All of those conditions make it ripe for it to exist. It's quite hot, and in fact, on a clear day, you could see it boiling like this picture shows you, and it's hot enough to boil eggs. This, in fact, interesting, was done in 2007 by an adventure filmmaker called George Coronas as part of the Angry Planet TV series. You could probably find it still on the TV and see when he visited Dominica, rigged up something that allowed him to upsail across more or less above the lake, stay there suspended, and dropped a bag of eggs into the lake, boiled it, and was able to do that as part of his, he likes these adventurous things. It was quite a challenge. It's not something that we suggest people doing. It's quite dangerous. Now, decidedly, the lake consists of a mixture of clays, pumice, and other materials, loose materials. Now, one of the things I should tell you is that visitors to the lake, you see that ledge that you have there, you really need to stay away from the ledge. I was mentioning that to you before. One of the reasons is because sometimes there's a sudden release of dangerous gases. And gases come out of the lake all the time, volcanic gases. Some of them can be dangerous, but they tend to get diluted as soon as they come out. They come out in small enough quantities, they get mixed with the atmosphere, and they're no longer dangerous to anyone. But sometimes you can have a big bubble come out. And if you're close to the edge, you could get engulfed by this bubble. And you could find yourself in difficulty. This in fact happened in 1900 when 2 members of a 3-man hiking party died after being asphyxiated by such a release and falling to their death. Now, on a clear day, along with a boiling lake that you see in front of you, or you could barely see because of the steam, it really is an impressive view at this ledge here as you stand looking into the lake. You can probably see the ocean in the distance and even the island of Martinique. And this is it, people. This is where I'm going to leave you today. Our tour has ended, and all that is needed is for you to return by way from which you came. You have another, unfortunately for you, you have another 7 miles to walk back. But the thing that you have to look forward to is getting to the Tito Gorge and soaking those weary limbs in the river at the Tito Gorge, having a well-deserved beverage while you soak those limbs. I trust that you have enjoyed the tour, that you've learned something about this beautiful land called Dominica, and that you're now truly inspired to physically make this hike. It's really worth it, but don't take it for granted. We in the Caribbean must live with our volcanoes, must learn to live with them. They are both majestic and beautiful, even though they can be dangerous at times, and that's why we monitor them. That's why we make sure we prepare for them. All that's left for me to do is now leave you with the video I mentioned there in the slide. This lovely video we got from Mr. Elvis Stedman, who's one of the best guides you'll find for taking a hike to the Boiling Lake. He's in Laudat, on that area. You can find out about him, he's arranged with him to take you to the Boiling Lake and have a fantastic time. I trust you like the slides. I trust you learned something, and I urge you to enjoy the video that follows. Thank you very much.